Today we're out at a location called Fort Huger. As you can tell by the spelling behind me, H-U-G-E-R, it's a little bit different than the way it's spelled. Now this fort was put on the river here to be used as a cross point from Mulberry Point across the river. And the purpose was for shells to be fired crisscross from each other and attack ships from either side coming down the river to prevent intrusion or going up to Richmond. On May 8th, however, when ironclads started approaching this area, it was very apparent that the shells were not going to work on the ironclads. So eventually, this fort that we're about to go to and show you was abandoned, and the weaponry was destroyed. So we'll go take you down there today. In the area I'm at right now was the encampment of the land-based troops, the 5th Virginia, from October all the way to May, when the fort was given over. The 5th Virginia was out here to try to protect the fort from a land invasion. Lieutenant Colonel Fletcher was out here in charge of that 5th Virginia, and out somewhere in these woods here would have been where they would have been encamped in tents and makeshift places to live. Now where I'm walking right now is it's over a modern bridge that was constructed here. When they were putting this together to try to make this a more accessible place for the public to come visit. But it is actually in the same place where the original bridge going into the fort would have been constructed on Fort Huger. The fort took many months to build. Hundreds of men were out here working on this fort, some of them enslaved, some paid. It took a long time to build this fort, and it never really met the expectations of the commanding officers that had impressed the need upon this area. Walking past the fort walls coming into this fort, it's really like walking back in time. The walls are still very tall. The earthworks are still in place here. And there's a nice trail that goes around to different points to tell you or teach you about a fort and how it's built, and the different types of units that would have been here and what the purpose is of this fort on the river. Today we're in Isle of Wight, Virginia at Fort Huger. And I know what you're thinking, that's a funny name. Well, I thought it too. It's spelled H-U-G-E-R. I thought Huger. I was wrong. According to the sign, it's pronounced Huger. And it was named after a Confederate officer who was an ordnance officer with the United States Army originally during the Mexican-American War and served with distinction. But then eventually he starts to serve with the Confederacy. This land out here was actually surveyed by Colonel Benjamin Talcott, and he saw this as a strategic point, a place that would be a strong point or overlook for the James River. He was correct in that account, but what they could not expect is that there would be a battle of the ironclads, and that warfare would surpass anything on the Navy than they've ever seen before. And once the Battle of the Ironclads happened, this place and other forts around the river really became a moot point, because when the ironclads come up the river here in May of 1862, they're firing their cannons towards those ironclads, and the cannonballs are just bouncing right off of the hull. there's nothing you can do about it at that point. So the 5th Virginia is camped out here to protect the fort from the outside. Ordnance officers and ordnance men are inside. Once they realized that, I believe it was right around May 8th, 1862, they realized that. They started coming up with a plan to evacuate the fort, get the forces out of here, and destroy the gear in the inside. And on the 14th, 15th, and 16th of May, 1862, that's exactly what they did. They abandoned the fort. And the fort fell into the hands of the Union Army, and the rest is just history. I'm standing in front of the shot furnace and the shell house. In every earthen fort, there was always a dirt mound where cannonballs and fuses and things like that were kept. And the purpose of that was to protect it from incoming shells and also to protect it from weather. And off slightly to the left here would have been the hot shot furnace. Cannonballs would have been slid into this furnace and were brought up to temperature really hot, and then brought out and placed in cannons and fired at wooden ships for the purpose of not only exploding on the target, but to set the wooden ship on fire. Now, none of this works when you factor in ships that are made of iron. The ironclads would roll through here, and when the cannons would fire, these cannonballs would simply bounce right off the surface. And you can't set that on fire unless something penetrates the surface of the ship. I'm standing in probably one of the most dangerous places inside the fort. Directly behind me here is the remnants of the powder magazine inside the fort. The reason why this is so dangerous is because this earthen mound basically kept all of the black powder, hundreds and hundreds of pounds of black powder inside it. If anything penetrates the dirt mound, or if there's a fire, and this thing goes off, it's going to destroy this whole section of the fort and probably kill anybody that's within range. So the 14th, 15th, and 16th of May in 1862, this mound was actually destroyed and the contents taken out, so it could not be used. One of the signs inside the fort speaks about African Americans at Fort Hughie. And it talks about the enslaved members that were here forced to help build this fort. A fort that would, if done in victory, would prevent them from becoming free. It also talks about, it lists the names of the men who were freed, who were actually working in this fort as well, and were supposed to be paid 50 cents a day for back-breaking labor. The Commissioner of Revenue, B.J. Gray, sent a letter to Richmond stating that those men had not been paid and that he was actually going to come to Richmond and collect if they were not paid. This is the south bastion of the fort, and in this location, more armament would have been placed to prevent the boats from coming up and down the river, because the entry point for the naval forces coming into this river is somewhere off in the distance, just out there over the ridge. This is an extremely impressive fort. It's not the largest fort that I've ever been to, or earthen fort, but it's very well preserved, and you can tell a lot of work has been put into this to keep it that way. And the view from here, looking out at the river, is pretty excellent. And then just the amount of history that happened here is significant for the Civil War. During that time, when the land forces were coming in for the attack that McClellan had in place, troops on the other side of the river were actually retreating. They were falling back because that was kind of by design. But these forts were left out here to protect the river, to keep things from getting worse. When the ships came in through that river and they realized that it was ironclads and that the cannonballs were bouncing right off of it, then it became very clear that this fort was going to be outdated for that type of warfare. Now, it would have continued to prevent wooden ships from coming up and down the river. But the problem with that is if the ironclads get over here and they clear the way and there are forces coming in from behind this fort, it will eventually get surrounded. There will not be enough troops to cover the entry points. It'll be overwhelmed, and everybody in this fort, including its material, will be taken hostage, and prisoners of war and such and so forth. So they made what they thought was the smartest move possible. They abandoned the fort, they destroyed all the goods inside, and the troops went elsewhere for the Confederacy. And just to give a reference of how high some of these walls are, behind me is where the shot furnace would have been located. You can actually see some of the bricks out here on the ground from that shot furnace. And then the bomb proof is in the background, and it rises up pretty tall. It's above my head, actually. And then coming around the corner here, we'll take a look at one of the locations where the cannons would have been placed. And they have a cannon in place right now so that you can kind of see what it would have looked like. Well, I hope you like the video here from Fort Huger in Isle of Wight, Virginia. If you like, please click like and subscribe to the channel for much more to come. And we'll keep those videos posted up here so you can see all the different places we go to along the way in history. Until next time, this is History with Waffles. We'll see you later.